drinking beer, smoking marijuana, listening to Judas Priest, and contemplating suicide. Ray was dead within seconds. Jay wounded himself, survived for 3 years, but later died from what doctors termed complications of his injuries.
James and Ray were chanting, "Do it, do it, do it." They did not even know where it came from. Do it.
It came from the Judas Priest album, according to Dr. Wilson Bryan Key, a professor of marketing who has written extensively on subliminal messages. He says the song "Better by You, Better Than Me" contains the barely audible words, "Do it," repeated over and over.
And each time "do it" is increased in hysterical intensity. So it's "do it, do it, do it, do it." And we pulled 12 of those out of that one song.
Dr. Keaton sees images of sex and death in all kinds of things, from the Ritz cracker to 17th century art. He sees the word sex written in Lincoln's beard on the $5 bill. There is no subliminal content on the Stained Glass album.
Observers of the music scene are frightened by this and other recent court cases.
I think right now the attacks on rap music and heavy metal represent a very essential threat to liberties.
The members of the Judas Priest band say they've done nothing wrong, that the whole notion of subliminal lyrics is preposterous.
Did you say "do it" sometime during the recording?
Now,
George Lewis, NBC News, Reno, Nevada.
Alright guys, how are you doing? You are very welcome to another episode of the From the Depths podcast. As always, my name is Emmett, and you're very welcome to another episode of the show. So after a short break, we're back again on the airwaves, chatting away about metal. Sigh of relief to some of you, because for the past few episodes I was of course talking about the George Romero Dead Trilogy. That is the last of the horror podcasts for the foreseeable future. I'd planned on doing a lot more of those, but the listenership wasn't really there for it. So yeah, I don't see myself doing that going forward, but never say never. I have a few movies I want to talk about. So I don't know. There probably will actually be a horror episode. I'm just thinking out loud. Anyway, so this is a long promised podcast. I've promised this, I'd say, for close to a month now. Have spent all of that time looking up and researching, trying to get as much information about the event as possible. I'll get to that in a minute. So we haven't been on the air for a few weeks. I was concentrating on finishing up college for this year, wrapping up placement, getting my portfolio in. So that's all done. I have a really manageable week now. I only work 4 days a week now in my job, and I'm off for 3, so there's loads of more time now, extra time in the week to do interviews, to record panel episodes and stuff like that. If you're a friend of mine and you have been messaged at some point about hopping on the show, expect me to be hounding you a little bit more about that, because what I'm doing is I was a little bit sick in that I didn't have any content for when I needed to take a break. So what I've started doing now, or at least I'm planning to do it, is actually record some episodes in bulk and have them kind of on layaway, so that if it is a case then that I don't have time during a week to record an episode, which easily does happen, and I'm going to be doing another placement between September and Christmas. So that's going to be a pretty that for English. It's going to be a pretty busy period for myself. So I'm just want to have that free time, pre-recording some episodes to try and get it done and stuff like that. I'm recording one with a very, very special guest tomorrow. Recording that tomorrow even, and if that is in the can and nothing goes wrong and we don't have to reschedule it or anything like that, it'll be next week's episode. But I'm not going to say anything until it's in the can, because I've made the mistake of doing that in the past, and then interviews haven't happened and stuff, and it's been a pain. Looking forward to the one that I've lined up for tomorrow, though. I really hope it does actually take place and happen. But anyway, back with the podcast this week now. We are talking about the sad case surrounding Ray Belknap and James Vance. And before I get any further with this, I kind of thought for the past week or two before I actually sat down to record this episode of the show, I thought, will I give a warning before the intro music plays at the start of the episode, or will I wait until I start talking? And I kind of went up with what I'm doing now. Obviously I didn't put one before the episode, but I'm throwing it in now. So obviously this episode, the show, given the topic at hand, is going to cover subjects such as suicide. It's going to cover neglect. It's going to cover trauma. It's going to cover a lot of topics that might be emotionally triggering for some people. And I am just throwing in that word of warning now that maybe if you are not in a right headspace, this might not be the time to listen to this episode of the podcast in particular. I got loads more lighthearted ones. I got ranty ones that'll probably make you laugh. I got ones where I talk about a band's history for over an hour or so. And if you don't want to be hearing about suicide and stuff like that and death and quite depressing topics, I should say, maybe this week's episode isn't the one for you. But if you are interested in ploughing along and listening to basically the story of these two young men and how metal in a sad way surrounded their deaths, then stick with us, because I think this is a very interesting story, and I think it's one that definitely needs to constantly be told, so that it's not kind of downplayed and forgotten about, which it in recent times kind of has been, from my research anyway on it. It's you don't find many articles talking about it anymore. Some people could probably make the argument that's been talked about too much, but I don't know. I didn't hear a lot about this when I was getting into metal as a teenager, and normally that's what you hear the most when you're getting into metal. You hear about all the controversial stuff that happened. I don't want to say that it's a drawing factor to metal, because it's not, but it's definitely one of those things you find yourself reading up on more when you're 15, 16, 17 and getting into metal. I know particularly with myself, I had a huge interest in like the situation surrounding Dead from Mayhem and his suicide. But there's loads of different examples now, and I just can't think of them offhand. Like, I'm immediately going back to all the black metal examples I was about to say, with the church burns and stuff like that, and with Faust killing your man in the woods and stuff like that. That's the really interesting stuff, and it's the really controversial stuff. And there's a great quote, and I can't remember who said it: "The controversy creates cash," which it does, and everything like that. But definitely gets people's attention and stuff like that. And it's definitely what got my attention as a kid and everything like that. Music aside and everything like that, because obviously the music was first and foremost in getting me into metal and stuff like that. But I know that I remember a lot of the times getting into metal, just sitting down and reading up about some of these cases and stuff like that. They're quite interesting. This one in particular, though, is quite sad. But before we actually get on to talk any more about that, I'm going to do what I usually do at the start of the show, so that I don't have to do it halfway through and interrupt the flow of the show, and that is, I'm going to do the housekeeping. The housekeeping is basically me just plugging stuff to do From the Depths. I have started throwing up records on the From the Depths page again, and trying to get the algorithm kind of going with the page, trying to get followers back and stuff like that, now that we're on a regular release schedule again and stuff like that. If you want to keep up to date with the show or anything like that, if you like the show and you want to suggest it to our friend, if you've enjoyed it and you want to help us grow our platform and stuff like that, be an absolute legend. Like and share posts, do you know what I mean? If you really like an episode of the podcast, please do share it on your Instagram story or on your Facebook and stuff like that. It really does help to gain listenership and stuff like that. And as I've said in the past, I don't do the show or anything like that to draw a massive audience, but it is a little bit disheartening when you put a lot of time and effort into an episode and it has very minimal views. Do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not aiming for a lot, do you know what I mean? But it is, and it kind of helps with motivation too. You're going to go and you're going to make more episodes as well if you know people are listening. If you know people aren't listening, it's kind of disheartening. But it's the same with any podcast starting off. I've been inconsistent with releases as well, so that plays a part in it too. But if you have been enjoying the show, if you want to help us grow and stuff like that, and you want to support From the Depths as a platform in any way, please do that. Please like and share and support our social media. So you can find us on Instagram at From the Depths Metal, and you can find us on you can find us on Instagram at From the Depths Metal, and you can find us on Facebook at From the Depths Metal Radio. I can announce as well that From the Depths will be returning as a radio show on Wired 99.9 FM this coming September or October, whenever they go back on the air. And I can also confirm that the show will be going under some bit of a name change, because From the Depths now has obviously become the platform more than anything. So the show itself that it started from, because this is how From the Depths started. It started as a college radio show. That's going to need a different title now, so I'm working on that. Was calling it Cuts to the Crypt for a few weeks. That will probably change. I'll probably try and find something else for it. But we'll get to it. We'll get to that bridge when we come to it. I'm actually quite interested too in maybe doing a few once-off radio episodes throughout the remaining weeks of the summer. I might do one every 2 weeks, and I'll release it on a Friday, where I just sit down and play 2 hours worth of music. And I think I might actually do it as a compliment to some episodes I've planned coming out. Like, I want to do an episode of ranking the albums of Scorpions. I think it'd be great crack to sit down with the guest who's going to be on that episode of the podcast, But I think it'd be interesting to sit down with that guest and talk away and play a Scorpions tracks for 2 hours. And I think that's something. I think a lot of people have asked me when there's no music on the podcast, and literally a lot of the time it's copyright. I can play trailers, I can play sound bites, I can play like 5 to 10 seconds worth of an artist song, but I can't play the whole song unless I have like written consent by them. The very first episode of the show actually with Eric Bell isn't on YouTube because of that. I used a sound bite from the New Thin Lizzy box set, and as a result of that, it was taken down as soon as it went up. I will re-upload that interview onto the YouTube channel because there's a lot of people who are looking for it and don't use Spotify. Just a heads up as well, you don't need to have a Spotify account to listen to the show on Spotify, or a premium account, I should say. You can't pick specific tracks, but you can pick specific episodes of podcasts on Spotify. So that was just something I learned recently. Anyway, I'm already gone on a bit of a tangent with the housekeeping. Just follow the social medias, help us out. That's basically what I'm asking. Nice to be nice and all that crack. Okay, cool. So we are talking about the unfortunate trial of Judas Priest. So let's talk about how all of this came about. So on December 23rd, 1985, it was 85, yeah. Raymond Belknap, who was 18 at the time, and James Vance, who was 20, they had spent about 6 hours drinking beer and smoking weed inside I can't remember where exactly it was. I know that I'm getting ahead of myself. I know it was in one of their houses anyway. But they were obsessed with Judas Priest at the time. The two lads would always have Priest on play. They'd have him on repeat. I can't remember who it was, but I was watching that documentary, Dream Deceivers, about the trial and stuff like that, and I think it might have been one of Ray's sisters, but she said something along the lines of, people get up in the morning and they have breakfast. Ray would get up and he would have Judas Priest outside in the room. So they're majorly obsessed with Judas Priest at the time. So they were sitting around drinking beer and smoking joints while listening to Judas Priest. It wasn't a regular behaviour for the two lads to engage in, but for whatever reason on this night, which again December 23rd 1985, the two men decided they would make a suicide pact. And they both took a shotgun each, and they went out the back garden and proceeded to shoot themselves in the head. James is quoted as saying, prior to firing his fatal blast, James said in the documentary about Raymond that just before Ray shot the fatal blast that would kill him, he just said while he was holding the gun to him, he said, "Boy, I really fucking wasted my life." Then boom, he shot himself and he was dead. This is going to sound incredibly weird on my part to say, but Raymond was very lucky that he died when the blast went off, because unfortunately for James, he did not. James survived the blast, and he would be horribly disfigured from the results of it. Like, do you know what I mean? I've thrown up a artist rendition of James's scarring, but I haven't thrown up an actual photo of Ray's wounds and stuff like that. I think it's quite graphic. I might throw it on the post promoting this episode when the show comes out and stuff like that. But it is quite graphic. It won't, like, I'll make it one of those posts where it's multiple photos and give you a warning beforehand. But incredibly hard to look at, and it's sad too. Like the lads are so young as well when this happens too. One thing. Do you know something? Again, I'm getting ahead of myself. We'll talk more about James, because this part of the podcast to talk about leading up to the trial and everything like that. So James would later die on November 28th, 1988, right? He would fall into a coma on Thanksgiving that year, and he had been admitted to hospital on November 15th for treatment related to depression. His attorney claimed a drug overdose sent James into a coma, and doctors told James's mother, Phyllis Vance, that her son was 99.9% brain dead. At this time, James had a 1-year-old daughter, and his attorney claimed his daughter would become the heir to his estate. They were assuming they would gain an estate following the suit they'd brought against Judas Priest. So, one thing that I've not written down in my notes here that I really want to address is it is very obvious. To give you a bit of background to this, I study social care work in school. In college, I should say, and this I think this is the reason I was so interested in the case, because watching that documentary, it's quite evident that there is emotional neglect being shown to, particularly to James. I don't know as much to Ray. they talk quite a bit about James's upbringing and stuff like that. James's father walked out on him at a very, very young age. Phyllis, she remarried. I can't remember the fella's name, but the fella openly admits with a smile on his face on camera that James came home kind of with glazed eyes. He must have been smoking joints with Raymond, and he took off his belt and proceeded to beat him. Like I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. Did he beat him with his belt? He either beat him with his belt or he beat him with his fists. One or the other. He openly admits it and he laughs about it and stuff like this. And he's there and he basically gets a kick off of James saying that he'd never smoke weed again because he was too afraid to endure the beating. And it's very apparent as well watching Phyllis and that guy through, like, he's a former alcoholic as well. That's mentioned throughout it too. So I think a lot of the times when James would come back and stuff like that, he would take out that transgressions out on James and stuff like that. You can hear in James's voice he's quite a shy individual and stuff like that, suffering from a quite obvious lack of confidence and stuff like that. It's probably exacerbated a little bit more then because of the scar and the disfigurement as a result of the shotgun blast. But yeah, it's quite obvious watching this documentary and watching the behaviour of Phyllis and her husband and stuff like this, that there is neglect going on, and I would attribute that being the major factor in James deciding that he wants to take his own life and everything like that. I don't actually know as much about Raymond. I don't know. Like I've read. There was the biggest help with making this episode of the podcast, I have to say, was I found like archived issues of the LA Times online, which, like, you know, it loads of information that wasn't on any wiki pages related to this or any Rolling Stones articles related to this. And yeah, I'm after losing my trail of thought there now. Jesus Christ, this heat is really getting to me. Anyway, let's go on about the trial and stuff like that. It's quite obvious that there was neglect going on there anyway in the case of James. I don't know as much about Raymond. Like I said, I just couldn't find as much information. Maybe I was reading stuff and it just fell out of my head, because that's the way I'm feeling now with this heat. My fucking brain is falling out of my ears. So anyway, let's talk a little bit more about the trial. So upon the two lads deciding to take their own lives and James surviving, both families would file a suit against Judas Priest and CBS Records, claiming the band's music was responsible for the two men's actions. They would sue both Judas Priest and CBS for a total of $6.2 million in damages. Their main evidence behind this was their claim that the music Judas Priest was producing sends negative messages to their fan base, and that the band went as far as using subliminal messages in their music to inspire fans to self-harm and to take their own lives. They claimed that when played backwards, that the music found on the album Stained Class will feature a subliminal message relating to killing yourself. One stated "fuck God" or "fuck Jesus," something along the lines of that, and one was claiming "do it." Throughout the trial, the main claim against the band was that their music contained subliminal messages. Wilson Brian Key, a self-appointed subliminal message expert, claimed that there were several subliminal messages placed throughout the Stained Class album. I'm going to play you now a very, very short clip of him talking about it briefly.
What makes it even more incredible is that the lawsuit contends the teens were influenced by subliminal messages of death and suicide on the record. One of their main witnesses is Wilson Brian Key, who's written books on subliminal messages.
Time must end before 16. This reoccurs in the lyrics. The idea that 16 is a high point in life. After that, it's all downhill, so pick your time and place and blow yourself away. Okay, the first line, read forward, says, "New arms into adullar bliss." Now, when you take that line out and play it backwards, you're getting this. Sing my evil spirit.
Another self-professed expert brought in to further the claims of the use of subliminal messages by the band went by the name of Bill Nickloff, who later turned out was actually a marine biologist and an amateur audiophile. He claimed the band's music being played backwards featured phrases such as "fuck the Lord." However, this was quickly dismissed. And this is a major thing throughout this trial, which isn't outwardly stated in any documentaries about it, but is definitely hinted at. A lot of people wanted so badly for Priest to lose this trial and to be found guilty, so that rather than take responsibility for failures as failures as parents and stuff like that, that they would have a scapegoat to go to. A lot of people lied about their profession to be able to claim this, that, or whatever against the band, and thankfully the judge wasn't too swayed either way going into the case and everything like this. Saw it with a clear lens, and and had a level-headed kind of view on it and everything like that. Thank God, because the chain effect of this would have been dire. You had it with Tipper Gore and stuff like that in the 1980s as well, trying to impose very, very harsh censorship on the arts. I will be doing a podcast on that down the line, but it's basically a war of attrition and a battle of moral views, to be quite honest with you. It is one of those things that it exists throughout the trial and everything else. It was like a witch hunt at sometimes. Credit where credit's due to Priest. They knew that they hadn't put any subliminal messages in their music and stuff like that. They stood tall, they stood firm, and it paid off in the end, because they were able to very, very confidently fight their fight that they would have had to fight and everything like this. Another thing as well is, which I found very, very strange anyway, the family's legal representation, their representatives and everything like this, they went as far as to ask Halford to sing the lyrics to Better By You, Better Than Me inside in the courtroom. Like, they didn't ask him to read it out, they asked him to sing it out, which I found very, very strange. I'm not going to throw in the clip of that, because that's more editing I'd have to do, and I'm a lazy cunt. But I found that quite strange. It's quite clear as well throughout this trial that the mother of Ray Belknap is obviously like severely heartbroken and stuff like that. She's after losing her child and everything like this. James Vance's mother, Phyllis, is not the case. You can kind of see she is like emotionally detached from the whole situation, and she just wants to win. I really can't recommend watching that documentary Dream Deceivers anymore. That was my main resource for this podcast, and probably tell you I'm only basically giving you an overview of this trial. I'm not going into it in any bit of depth or anything like that, but I really do recommend checking it out. It's a fantastic watch. As well as that, it's like the only thing that has like footage of James talking before he passed away in 88 as well. So I would recommend it on that. So we'll get to the verdict then. The judge would rule a verdict of not guilty in favour of Judas Priest, claiming the music played no role whatsoever in the death of Belknap or the disfigurement of Vance. He stated that while there was no evidence to support the idea that subliminal messages played a role in what happened that night, there was already too much pre-existing elements in both boys' lives that led to the double suicide attempt. The judge would, however, place a sanction of $40,000 on CBS for failing to produce the master tapes for Judas Priest's Stay in Class album, which was the album, like I've said, that was the majority of all the claims of subliminal messages were from that record. A very, very cool thing that Priest and their legal representative kind of essentially had to do this. They went out to a record store and they basically said, I can buy any record, I can play it backwards, and I can claim to find a message in it. I can't remember what the one they didn't say now when I was watching what the record was, but they said they bought the record, they actually played it in court, and Halford goes, it's like, and as you'll see when we play this backwards now, it's going to do, and that's a terrible Rob Halford impression, but he was basically saying that it was going to say something along the lines of peppermint tea or something like that, and he played it back, and lo and behold, did the exact same thing. And there was a great argument to be made that, you can find anything if you want to find it bad enough. And I think all of the people on the family side trying to find subliminal messages were basically looking for things that weren't there, but they were finding them. Do you know what I mean? If you want something bad enough, you're going to find it. So that was how the trial ended. In the aftermath, like I mentioned there a few minutes ago, a documentary surrounding the trial entitled Dream Deceivers was released in 1992. It documents the trial as well as the backgrounds of James and Vance prior to their suicide pact. It is also the only existing footage of James discussed in the trial before he died in 1988. Now, some people online have claimed otherwise. They claim, oh, well, you can get this on CBS News and stuff. All the interview footage with James was just in that documentary, and they all have the rights to it. It's all in the corner. It's all in the corner of those news articles when James is on screen. It's like footage provided by so and so and whatever. So yeah, that is the unfortunate. Well, it is unfortunate. It is the unfortunate tale of Judas Priest and the untimely deaths of Ray Belknap and James Vance. Basically, to summarize, it's not going to be the longest podcast in the world because it's, do you know what I mean? It's there's not that much to talk about it, but you know, it is important. I think it is important to keep this situation kind of constantly, not constantly. What am I trying to say here? It's important that this story isn't forgotten about. Like, do you know what I mean? Because it shows how people can manipulate something and use it as something else. Like, Ray Belknap and James Vance didn't kill themselves over Judas Priest. We know this. In 2021, if you went and said, "Oh, this music made someone kill themselves," you'd kind of be like, that's absolute arse. The reason that Ray Belknap and James Vance killed themselves was a load of different issues. There was definitely, without a doubt, undiagnosed mental health conditions or trauma existing there in both boys. I would imagine James has unresolved issues over his father leaving early. I'd say there's issues there relating to the fact that his stepfather was beating the shit out of him. I think the two lads were self-medicating for these issues with drinking drugs, and do you know what I mean? They weren't being looked after emotionally by their families, and that was what happened for a finish. And I don't want to try and vilify Ray's mother as much as I want to vilify James's parents in this, but it is quite obvious when you watch that Dream Deceivers documentary that they are shifting accountability for their son's death on someone else rather than take responsibility for themselves. And as well as this, a lot of the times they would lash out, particularly in James's house, they would lash out at James quite a lot just for playing heavy metal music, because they didn't like heavy metal music, they didn't like the imagery and everything like this. And it's gas to even think about that, because it's just kind of like, do you know, parents nowadays, I would argue, would hope anyway, would know better than to blame music on their child's behaviour. Now, I'm not going to say that metal metal doesn't like encourage certain behaviours and stuff like that. Like, you know, it's quite common for, you know, especially at gigs and stuff, for us to like overly consume fucking drink and shit like this. And there is people that, you know, that experiment with drugs, and drugs can be certain parts of certain subcultures of the metal and everything like this. I'd be a liar if I said that wasn't true and everything like this. But you know, if I had a son in the morning, I'd turn around and he had like, you know, if he was like acting out and everything like this, like, I'm not going to go and be like, right, it's the records inside in his room or the thing that caused this, because that's not true at all. Like, do you know what I mean? Definitely can influence certain behaviours and stuff like that, but I don't think it'd be the cause of specifically something this severe. Like, do you know what I mean? And as well as that, if it was the cause, it goes back to what the about what the families were trying to make the case of throughout the trial, about subliminal messages being there. I think the two lads, if they did find any meaning in any of the songs for them to go and kill themselves, they were looking for that meaning in the song. Do you know what I mean? The song "Better By You, Better Than Me," it's like, it's not even a Priest original, it's a cover and stuff like that. You know what I mean? So, yeah. This is definitely going to clock in as one of the shortest podcasts I've ever done, just shy of half an hour. But yeah, do go out of your way to check out that Dream Deceivers documentary. It's on YouTube in full. I highly recommend it. It's a great watch, and you'll probably come away from it with a little bit more knowledge about the whole situation than me rambling into a mic for a very short amount of time for once. God, I usually thought that 45 minutes was short for a podcast, but this is definitely the shortest. So yeah, that is that. That is the trial of Judas Priest. I will definitely, moving forward, be doing more episodes like this. Thankfully, the historical things relating to metal that I want to talk about, particularly over the next few months, I have mates who are big into those certain historical events as well. I won't say which, because I don't want to spoil them yet. So there will be guests on them too, and we'll be talking about them. The Tipper Gore one in particular, that is going to probably be the next one. When Dee Snider took on the PMRC. The PMRC, for those you don't know, they were like this kind of coalition over in the United States, and they wanted rock music and rap music to all be, and metal music to all be like heavily censored and stuff like that, and it would have to go through a screening process as such before it could be released to the public. Now, you could argue there is a little element of that exists today, but you know, in this day and age now, when like physical media isn't really like a thing anymore and stuff like that, and you can release your own albums online, It's only going to be an issue if you're on a serious major label and you're like a radio artist, you know what I mean? So yeah, that is that for this week's episode of the podcast. Only 20-something minutes in length. Jesus. Be a handy one now if you want to go for a run or something like that. Until next week's episode, guys, I have been Emmett. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next week. Good night and God bless.